Ahoy! Welcome to WTF Wednesdays. We're going to go through Reddit and find interesting stories and posts about different workplaces and what's going on. So I'm going to chuck that on the screen here, insert edit, and we're going to cover on the stories. And I'll do that through the lens of being a consultant, coach, and CEO of my own and past companies. Worst bosses and best bosses. This is an interesting thread, but there's one I'm going to zoom in on, which is a comparison of the worst and best boss this person's ever had. Worst boss, demanded I come in 10 minutes before my shift, but refused to sign my time card if I added those 10 minutes as overtime. Micromanaged so badly that she'd get angry if I did something I knew she'd want me to do without waiting for her to tell me to do it. Did one-on-one meetings, my favorite, every month that had no constructive criticism other than her complaining that I needed to talk to my coworkers more. Ma'am, I'm here to work, not gossip. Absolutely refused to let downtime be downtime. The nature of my job was dependent on material that was delivered to our site. No material equals nothing to do. But by God, she'd find something for me to do, and only me. Everyone else got to sit around and gossip. I could not leave for the day when the clock struck the end of my shift. I had to wait for her to dismiss me, and boy, did she always take her sweet time doing it. All right, before we look at that one, let's go into the best boss. Best boss, current, does not care when I come in, when I take breaks, lunch, or when I leave, as long as the work gets done and I do my 40 hours. His meetings are actually more like check-ins because while he's the manager of my team's job is to help other teams. So I update him on what work I've been doing for other people. He treats me like an adult, imagine that, who will do their job without constant supervision. It's just so refreshing as a recent graduate. Best boss, obviously, great practice is having those check-ins and one-on-ones, which we've talked about at length in other videos, getting people to just get the work done. I say this quite often. If you're going to hire someone to do the job, does it really matter if they work 39 hours or 42 hours? An average of kind of full-time is full-time. What you actually want is the outcome, right? You don't go, I want to hire someone so they can sit in that chair over there for 40 hours. It's not what we're after. We're after the outcomes. And if we have really well-defined outcomes and strategic plans and cascading metrics, that becomes a lot easier. And it's either you did a good job and completed X, Y, Z, or you didn't quite hit the mark. You're going to need to focus in on these things. So that good boss has obviously nailed that. Updates on working is a simple way to do that. And he treats her like an adult. You would be shocked at the number of people that do not do that. All right, worst boss, which is going to be more fun. Demanded I come in 10 minutes before my shift, but refused to sign my time card. Yeah, consult your Fair Works on that one. I'm not going to get into it, but you know where that's going. Micromanaged so badly that she'd get angry if I did something I knew she'd wanted me to do without waiting. I always say to clients, what's the point of hiring good people, skills and talents and experience, and then telling them every single thing to do? Like automate that job, right? If you want to provide direct process inputs and measure every single output like to the minute, just automate or outsource, like get someone super cheap in another company or another region or whatever that looks like. I'm not condoning that practice, but it makes more sense for what they're trying to do, right? But the problem with micromanagement, a lot of people don't understand, is that it's not about making sure you do a good job. It's about the ego that comes with it. So I micromanage you because I want to feel good as a leader, and I want to make sure that you are aware of the power I carry and I can control you and make you do the things I want you to do, because that's how I'm going to show you that I'm a good boss. And also, I don't care if you don't think I'm a good boss, as long as you know I'm in control. Gossiping and criticizing people for not meshing well. Look, I do think people should make an effort to cohabitate and have some level of camaraderie with people they work with. But depending on the nature of the role, maybe that's just not required. Yeah, downtime not being downtime. It's interesting. I was working with a client recently, and they've just been running their legs off like a lot of people through COVID, but for the last 2 or 3 years. And you can just see it on people's face, the complete drain. The batteries are empty. There's no reserves. So I said to them, you've got to give people downtime. There has to be like this descent into just a bit of a lull. Obviously, if the work doesn't allow for it, you have to find creative ways to do it, whether it's upping capacity for a little while, or staggering shifts, or giving people a little bit of time in lieu, whatever that looks like. But you can't run someone into the ground and then expect continued results. What we see instead actually is the hours continue to be maintained, but the productivity and operational outcomes starts to cascade downwards. They go, oh, we're still working as hard with as many people, but we're not getting the same outputs. Like, your people are f***ing tired. And it's just it's not sustainable, right? You can run a marathon, but if you keep running the marathon, at some point your legs give out. And that's what's happening here, is people just keep going and going and going. I could not leave for the day when the clock struck the end of my shift. I had to wait for her to dismiss me, and boy, did she always take her sweet time doing it. I have no idea why you would have that as a practice. You wait here till I dismiss you. I'm aware that that's a practice that they do in primary schools, in year 4 or kindy. Hey, it's time for you to go. Or, hey, I haven't dismissed you, sit in your chair. Again, it's a power play, right? That's what I'm saying, is that this whole micromanagement driven approach is all about power and exercising power on employees. So that's not good practice from a leadership perspective. I worked for a nonprofit for 3.5 years. During that time, I experienced things like working 60 to 70 hours a week, but only being paid for 40, and being told that the rest was considered volunteer work, and that if I didn't like that, maybe she needed to find someone whose heart was in the mission. Finding out that everyone else had been given a raise but me, getting lectured for taking 3 days off that were approved, which I wouldn't have gotten paid for anyway. To visit my mother dying of brain cancer and attend her funeral, while she gave someone else 6 weeks off with pay for bereavement. Oh God, I can just see this now. Being fired for insubordination after refusing to sign a paper saying that I was neglecting my job duties as an hourly employee by not working days she wouldn't pay for, which was also an excuse to hire 2 people she knew at higher pay to run the business unit I had made profitable by somewhat myself. Being told I had to cover work responsibilities for other employees she was giving months of paid time off because they were afraid of COVID, while also doing my completely separate job responsibilities on time. Oh my God. Then taking 1 day off without pay because I was sick and had to get tested, and being lectured and told I could have quarantined at work. She herself took weeks off or worked from home, finding out that as the only employee with a degree in certifications, I was making 10 to 12,000 less than unskilled or semi-skilled workers with less responsibility, and the only one who did not get paid time off. Being told I should dye my hair to cover up the gray, wear contacts instead of glasses, work out more, lose weight, etc. That's probably one of the worst in writing examples I've seen. I heard some pretty dodgy stuff. There's a number of things wrong with this, right? I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or consultant to figure this out. But a few key issues, being fired for insubordination for not signing a paper. There was some good coverage of that recently on companies forcing people to sign contracts and NDAs for illegal activity. That's not going to go very well. I don't think that's going to hold up too well in a Fair Works type scenario. Finding out about other people's pay is a classic no-no. Obviously, you can't hide pay rates of what people are paid, but to have that kind of leaked through indiscrepancies and seeing job postings and not managing the narrative and having a clear reason for remunerating someone differently is pretty problematic. If you're going to pay someone a higher rate because they're more skilled, fine. You're gonna pay someone a higher rate because they're more experienced, fine. Come from a niche industry, fine, right? We get it. But to just pay someone a higher rate because they're your mates when they've got less qualifications and less experience than the person who's being employed to do the job, that ain't gonna work well. What else have we got in this one? Taking 1 day off without pay because I was sick and had to get tested, and being lectured and told that I could have quarantined at work. I mean, how do you quarantine at work? I've never heard of that before. That's probably not going to go well if you're a mining company or someone in an industry where you're heavily dependent on that sole source of operation. You wouldn't be doing that in a hurry. So yeah, look, that's pretty terrible. So if I was to go into an organization like this, a few key things, like what are the pay policies, and can we get someone from an HR background to just review, and probably a legal review to look at how we're compensating and hiring, and if we've got any grievances, working through those. Second is that leadership or leader clearly has one of two things going on. First is they've just gone completely rogue and people aren't aware that that's happening above them, and we can deal with that, bring that out and deal with it through some sort of survey or a culture program or qualitative interviews, whatever your preference is, pick your poison. There's a lot of ways to uncover that. Second might be that actually it's been condoned. And unfortunately, one of the things I see a lot of is you go into an organization like, we want to change, but we don't want to change as the leaders.
Bruh.
You go, well, you can only change as much in an organization as the highest level allows you to. You hit that cement ceiling, I call it, where you're just not going to break through that unless that leader wants to change. And that's the state of the organization. So we'd be looking at that. If you couldn't get the leaders on side, that's not a job we would want to get stuck into. And I'd say the person's probably better off leaving from that place.
Bye, have a great time.
To be quite fair. Okay, last we're going to do some quick fire. What did one of your worst managers say to you that confirmed he or she was the worst? All right, we're just going to power through a few of these. I don't care if you're sick, you're not staying home. The person was a line cook. Ugh. Okay. Yep, you can't do that. Told us that even if there were additional confirmed positive COVID cases, we might not be notified because company policy would not change. This was after we had a confirmed death from COVID and additional positive cases reported from nearby urgent care center. I no longer work there, and thankfully neither does he. His replacement, however, did decide that severely cutting sick leave and vacation time during a pandemic was inappropriate action. Oh, man. You kind of have to tell people if there's an outbreak and something's linked to your site. I can see that turning into some form of litigation once this all settles, if it hasn't already. Today, I was told by my manager that I shouldn't ask questions and try not to be too enthusiastic and let projects flow without interfering too much, which is exactly opposite of what the company tells us to do. Yeah, I'd be concerned about what that manager's trying to hide. Don't ask questions. Don't look over there. Just let it go. Your job is just to do what I tell you to do. Okay. Yep. Don't stay there. You can see something happening there. You don't get to use the whiteboard. This is good. Whiteboards, a lot of people use, and it's normal. I had a boss who used that as some condescending instrument to shame people or be patronizing with it. So I had to explain something really complex, and the interpretation of that, since it was loaded, was an assault on their ego. And I'm just like, F this, I'm so out to myself. Remember earlier we talked about asserting power and dominance and leaders hooking into these sticking points. Like, they're human at the end of the day, but it's latching onto these power plays of kind of instruments and control and things that just signify or project power when they actually don't. And it's pretty transparent. And to say you can't use the whiteboard because it's condescending or you're making me look dumb is never going to play out well. And then last is, if you want better pay, take on more responsibilities. Same person who, as a manager, just wanted to sit around in the back of the store wasting time, and after 3 months still needed help to do basic management tasks I helped train him on. Oh, there's a challenging one around more pay and more responsibility and doing more work. I think pay should be linked to value creation, not necessarily shareholder value creation or profit creation, but you do something and it creates value, whether that's a service or whether that's support to the team, or it doesn't have to be dollar value. It can be value in reduced effort, value in reduced stress, whatever. It could be anything. But I think people's compensation generally should be linked to some form of value that they create. And the reality is that your compensation will always be capped at the perceived value you create, right? So if a company perceives that the value you create is the equivalent of $40,000, I'm not saying it is, but it's the equivalent of $40,000 worth of value, and the market commands a roughly $40,000 person to do that, then to pay you $60,000 or $70,000 for that is not going to work, right? Because they'd go, well, at that level, would be better off to just recruit someone at that same $40,000. So we have to be mindful that the value you create or don't create is linked often to the pay. Now, obviously, things like politics and dynamics and tenure play roles in that. But one of the problems you see is that people have a perceived value of what they should be paid. And pay escalates, right? So you'll never meet someone, or very rarely meet someone who goes, I think I'm paid really well for what I do here. It's a really rare line. So you get this constant bump, bump, bump. But if you talk to the leader employing that person and say, we pay that person very well compared to market rates, go and speak to the person, they go, I think I should earn more here for all the work I put in. So there's this constant push-pull going on with salary and compensation, but the reality is it's linked more to value creation, as long as the guidelines are clear, market rates are clear, and people are pushing through that for that reason. So just remember, if you think that someone on your team is overpaid, if you're the leader, or if that person's feeling undervalued, then you can have conversations more around, well, what's the value creation? How do we create new skills for you? How do we uptrain you and invest that time and effort so that way you continue to generate more value and we can continue to value more on your role and you as an individual based on what you do here and the value alignment and the way we feel about you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all for reviewing worst bosses and worst companies. We'll make this a weekly segment kicking off on Wednesdays, but look forward to sharing more humor and opinions and everything that comes with that. Thanks. See you soon.